Well, good evening, Pax Vobis. Bless you. Thank you for your patience there. Still getting to grips a little bit with the technology, but there we are. We're here now and live. So, as many of you know, today is the 8th anniversary of my episcopal consecration, which took place in Canada, in the Collegiate Chapel of St. John the Beloved, at Huron University, and I was consecrated there by Archbishop Boniface Grosfold, assisted by Archbishop Dennis Dennis Undagobo. I think that's right. That's the first time I've never been able to say his name, and now I can't think of it for love nor money. It seems incredible that was 80 years ago, but nonetheless, it was, and thank God that we're still here now. So I thought it might be interesting for you. It might not, of course, but I thought what I might do this evening then is give a retrospective on the past 8 years since becoming a bishop. Now, there are some questions already sort of preset. I say that I haven't worked out my answers to any of them, and I'm going to pick them sort of randomly, so just bear with. We'll see. That'll be an element of risk and excitement to it, but also too, as the ticker tape says, feel free to ask your own questions too. I can't guarantee that I'll get round to answering them, or that I might not. I might not answer them at all, but we'll see. But feel free. As often sometimes I can't think of everything, and there may be questions that you have that I would never think of asking. So without further ado, let's begin. So I'm just going to close my eyes and randomly pick a question. Oh. Okay. Oh, I didn't expect that one so soon. What was the highest point? What's been the highest point of the past 8 years? That's a very good question indeed. And to make sure that I don't get that question again, I shall delete it. There we go. So what was the highest point? That's a very difficult question indeed. Truthfully, I would have to say that there's been more than one highest point. And that's not just being diplomatic, but being truthful. There have been so many events, so many situations that have been really quite incredible. I would suppose that the highest points perhaps would have to include being able to celebrate the Divine Liturgy with all the or most of the requisite pomp and circumstance necessary. So that's happened for priestly ordinations. That's happened for a couple of episcopal consecrations, where it has been nice, as it were, to be able to celebrate the ceremonies approaching something of their full splendour. Highlights of that would have to be the ordination of priests and subsequently the episcopal consecration of Bishop Caeli in Chicago. On both those occasions we had a superb schola, superb choir who sang beautifully. It was a joy to be able to sing the solemn liturgy. As you know, that most of my masses are generally low mass with hymns, so it was a real joy to be able to sing the preface, sing the collects, etc. The setting, of course, was beautiful in the Church of the Atonement there in Chicago. Those were definitely highlights. But also, too, significant highlights would have to include the recent apostolic visitation to the Philippines, where it was an absolute joy to spend so much time with faithful Christians, faithful Catholic Old Roman Christians, who really were living the gospel. You know, I don't. I tend to find, treat people as I find them, and although there are all sorts of socio and economic and demographic comparisons one could make between the standard of living and the cost of living between the Philippines and here, none of that really was what made the most impact on me, but really was finding a community of faith who were, each and every one of them, truly committed and dedicated to the gospel, dedicated to living the Christian life and manifesting it in all sorts of ways. I've not told them this, but my clerical colleagues in the Philippines impressed me greatly, particularly with their personal conviction. When the apostolic visitation began, we had a clergy retreat, and it was an opportunity for them to be able to make confessions. Now, as some of you will appreciate, us old Romans are few and far between. And so it's not easy, and it's not often that old Roman clergy are able to make the confession to somebody that they objectively, as it were, don't work with or work for, or have a hierarchical kind of relationship with. So I offered to hear confessions during that clergy retreat, and everyone took the opportunity, and of course I can't divulge, and I'm not going to divulge anything of the content of those confessions, but what it did was gave me a great insight, a very personal and privileged insight into the vocations of those individual priests, and great personal holiness and great conviction, and that was evident, as I say, in the clergy, and evident too in the faithful. One of the Saturdays I was there, I I don't know if I made a mistake of suggesting that I would happily hear confessions, and we started an hour before we were supposed to start holy hour and benediction, and in the end we didn't have a holy hour, we just had benediction, because so many wanted to come and make their confession. and again, I'm not going to divulge anything I can't. But again, it was a personal privilege and a highlight of my priestly ministry and life thus far. Again, to be able to hear and to help and to perceive the fidelity of these Christians, and their love of Jesus, their love for the faith, their love for the church, and their clear desire to do the right thing, to pursue after holiness and righteousness. Otherwise, other highlights of the past 8 years must surely include, of course, my own episcopal consecration in Canada. That was a tremendous affair. Again, there was a fantastic scholar who sang, and a beautiful liturgy. And again, great to spend time getting to know old Romans elsewhere. On this occasion, the other side of the Atlantic. And of course, my induction and installation here as Archbishop in Brighton, and being able to share that with so many friends, so many ecumenical friends who very graciously came and took part, and a joy on that occasion. This was within the octave of Pentecost that year. But a joy on that occasion to have my half-sister, who I'd only recently met, a joy to have Maureen join us and be with us on that occasion too. And also, what was lovely was that some of the people that we helped with the hub, homeless drop-in, were also came and participated, and actually helped with the catering for that event as well. So that was a very great and beautiful occasion, and the memory of which I will treasure for a long time. So there have been several highlights. I can think too of some personal highlights that I won't share right now, but that had particular significance for me. And on all of these occasions, what was wonderful was the affirmation, as it were, of my own priesthood, the affirmation of my own episcopate, and the opportunity to experience the fullness of those aspects to my life and vocation and ministry that those events afforded. All of them very humbling occasions. I know people often think that the gorgeous vestments and the high hats, the mitres, and being put on a throne, stuck on a chair at the front, is all very grand, but it is also too very humiliating. There's no other word to describe it. It's a very humbling experience. In part, as some of you know, because as the bishop, you have no control over how, for example, people take on and off or put on and off your mitre. So sometimes you sit there thinking that doesn't feel quite comfortable, but I can't do anything about it. I hope I look all right. And the occasions, on those grand occasions, when all the serving and everything is done properly, and so all the ritual kissing and all that kind of thing with the hands and stuff like that, it's all very humbling, actually. You don't feel, the last thing you feel is any sense of egotistical pride. I can say that with genuine sincerity. All those occasions have been very humbling occasions indeed. and one is only aware really of the great ministry and the fullness of the priesthood that one is enjoined to when one is when one is pontificating in the literal and proper sense. Yeah. Okay. Let's go for another random question. Oh, the other extreme. The other extreme. Okay, so what keeps me awake at night? A very great deal. As any of you who know me personally and know me well will know that I'm a bit of an insomniac. I rarely go to bed before 2 a.m. And I have to say that my most productive hours probably in the of a day are those last hours of my day. So really from sort of 10 or 11 p.m. Until about 2:30 a.m. My mind is in some ways at its most high productive. What keeps me awake? One of the things that some of you now, of course, have witnessed for yourselves in seeing the traditional rite of consecration. One of the things that I always feel has never really left me, and I've had massages and I've had physiotherapy, and it never goes away, and that and I don't mean this piously either, but the weight of the book of the Gospels during the rite of episcopal consecration. The book of the Gospels is placed on the back of the neck and the top of the shoulders of the person being consecrated. And at my consecration, for some reason, it was a particularly weighty, particularly weighty volume, and that has never left me. And of course, what it the gospel page that is opened, that is so literally the gospel that is on your neck from the book of the Gospels, is the gospel for Ascension Day, the Great Commission, and certainly I would say that one of the things that keeps me awake at night is the knowledge of my responsibility of and for effecting the Great Commission. An apostle is sent out, and bishops are successors to the apostles, and so that is the reason why that gospel of the Great Commission is opened in the gospel book and placed on our neck and shoulders when we are consecrated, to remind us, of course, that this is, as it were, the primary purpose of our responsibilities as bishops. So one of the things that often keeps me awake at night is thinking how can we evangelize? How can we spread the gospel? How can I assist our various old Roman clergy, our old Roman parishes and missions around the world to proclaim the gospel? How can I enable them to be effective disciples? How can I provide them with the tools, with the resources, the materials necessary to be effective missionaries? How can I equip them? How can I educate them? How can I train them? How can I form them? And that, brothers and sisters, is largely why these 6 o'clock broadcasts, and as you know, other broadcasts prior to lockdown, the the weekly catechisms on Saturday mornings previously, and the Wednesday night lectures. All of these I see as a necessary way for me to fulfill my responsibility and that great onus upon me to be an effective apostle, and to help and to assist and enable others and to facilitate others to be effective ambassadors of Christ in our world. The other thing that keeps me awake at night is the great responsibility that comes with being a pastor, comes with being a shepherd, particularly that comes with being a chief shepherd. And I don't say that that's what a bishop that's what a bishop is, and the burden of responsibility, particularly for those who are immediately entrusted to my pastoral care within the parish and mission here in Brighton, and also two of the clergy, and particularly those who are my sons, as it were, my spiritual sons. St. Paul referred and thought of Timothy as his spiritual son. And likewise, then it is usual for ordaining bishops to regard those that they've laid hands upon to be spiritual sons. And so one of the things I'm always conscious of is, and the scriptures in the New Testament are very clear, they're unequivocal on this point, that to be a pastor, to be a shepherd, one is responsible for the salvation of the souls entrusted to one's care. And as a shepherd to shepherds, I suppose, a bishop is, of course, particularly responsible for those whom he has entrusted or shared his ministry with in pastoring the flock. And so the cares and the concerns and the behaviours of my spiritual sons are as concerned to me as those other souls entrusted to my care amongst the laity. And particularly, I'm conscious of the fact that I will have to give an account on Judgment Day, as all pastors will. I will have to give an account for those who came my way, as it were, and who I, in turn, ordained and entrusted the Great Commission to. So, of course, clergy move around, they move about, and so some who I have ordained are no longer directly under my remit, I suppose you might say, but that doesn't mean to say that I don't have a care and concern for what they get up to, for what they for how they exercise the priesthood and the sacred orders that I gave them. So one of the things that keeps me awake at night sometimes is the care and concern for my spiritual sons, and what they're up to and what they're about, and especially those who, sadly, for a variety of reasons, but those sadly that we've had to we've parted ways with. That doesn't mean to say that I don't think of them. In fact, as some of you will know, at every Mass in the canon, I remember all those who are directly responsible to me, but also those for whom I am directly responsible for in the sacred ministry. Everyone I have laid hands on is remembered by me at every Mass, irrespective of health, irrespective of our of the circumstances of our current relationship every single one of them is prayed for by me, because I am conscious of the fact that I will be called to account when that dread judgment day comes, which can sometimes keep me awake at night. And of your charity, please pray for me, and indeed pray for them too. Right, let's have another question. I deleted that one, so I can't get it back. So I'm just going to randomly look away, and what comes up? Okay, so we're hopefully we're getting all the difficult questions first. So what was the lowest point? I'm not sure that there has been a sort of one lowest point. There have been several disappointments. There have been several low points, and it's not really not really fair for me probably to share them. I suppose in some ways I've already alluded to them in my answer to the previous question. But low points, of course there have been some, and some that still keep me awake at night. Some that I hope for a positive resolution to at some time in the future. I think again that most of you who know me personally know that I'm quite an affable and amiable person until you cross me, and even then it takes an awful lot for me to really sort of lose it, or rather it takes an awful lot for me to, as it were, cut somebody loose. But sometimes it's necessary. Our Lord himself speaks about it in the Gospels. Sometimes you have to let the dead bury the dead. Sometimes you have to cut off the withered and dead branch. Sometimes there is just no point kicking against the goad. I'm sure you're all familiar with those scriptural references. But so the lowest points have, I suppose, been on the personal level. Have been those times that have affected me or others personally. Otherwise, certainly there have been disappointments when we were operating Cherub's Kitchen. Indeed, that's a disappointment to me that we had to stop Cherub's Kitchen. I had hoped, at least temporarily, and we still might yet, of course, God willing. Who knows? The opportunity might come again to do something with that again. But of course, there were disappointments during that. Again, mostly to do with personalities and relationships. One would spend a lot of time, months literally, with some apprentices, but at the end of the, for all sorts of reasons, it would turn out to be they wouldn't graduate. They wouldn't pass. I'd like to think, however, that despite sometimes the end of their time with us, there were overall the experience was positive. Of course, we were working with people from a variety of difficult backgrounds, and so the idea, of course, was to provide a way of sometimes of work rehabilitation, sometimes of providing an introduction to the work environment. And so, some of the people that came our way had all sorts of difficult issues, some of which they hadn't really got over. Um, but so that was difficult. That was hard work, hard graft sometimes, especially when one was let down. Whenever that happened, it nearly always happened at a key, moment, or a key time operationally. So it would, create hiatus and drama. But such is kitchen life. And the same goes on, of course, in commercial kitchens everywhere. So, but that, I suppose, was provided some of the lowest points too of the past 8 years. Okay, there's enough dwelling on negativity. Let's try and find something more positive. So again, not looking. No, I didn't click. Not looking. Right, let's lose that question. Okay. Well, frankly, I've already answered that question, I would say. So let's let's ask another question. Okay, randomly looking or not looking. Oh no. Okay, that's a good question. What sustains you? Um, ultimately, ultimately, my faith. Ultimately, my faith. As many of you know, um, the most important part of my day, and the thing that really sustains me, and that if I don't have it, um, really puts a downer on the whole day. The whole day is just not, it's just not the same, or is, uh, but essentially the Mass, um, uh, offering the holy sacrifice of the Mass every day, um, because it's the purpose and fulfillment, ultimately, of my vocation um, as a priest, and a bishop is still a priest. The bishop is a high priest. He is has the fullness of the priesthood. Um, but throughout my priestly ministry, the thing that has always sustained me has been daily mass. Daily mass. And I think anyone who knows me, all those who I've ordained, all those who I've worked with, all those I have formed, all know the importance and the centrality of the Mass and of the Eucharist to my life personally. Um, a day when I haven't said Mass is not a day at all. And it's a very rare occasion. I invariably check that wherever I'm going to, as it were, my my rider, um, it always contains. I always make sure that I'm able to say Mass daily, wherever I go, wherever I am, and that, not that I quote him very often, but as John Paul II said, the Eucharist is the source and summit of the Christian life, and he was absolutely spot on with that. The Eucharist is everything, and forgive me for saying so, but I thank God that I am a priest, and during this lockdown that I've been able to receive the Eucharist every day. But believe you me, that's not a privilege that I take for granted. just the ability to be able to say Mass every day, but also to be able to provide the opportunity for many of you to make an act of spiritual communion. And as I said, I think last week, whenever I receive the Eucharist, certainly at the present time, I am conscious of intending to receive the Eucharist on behalf of all those who are watching the Mass. As you know, yesterday I spoke about spiritual communion, something that I think is seriously underrated by a vast majority of people. And while I concede, of course, that spiritual communion is not the same as receiving the Eucharist, nonetheless, it can be as good as. But of course, I reflected on that yesterday. If you haven't seen that, I recommend that to you, because so many have commented positively about last night's conference on spiritual communion. So please feel free to look at that. But to the Eucharist and communion with God sustains me throughout all the disappointments, both those that I alluded to and those that I said nothing about in the previous questions. The Mass, being able to take my concerns, to take my fears, to take my anxieties, to take my disappointments, to take them to the cross and hand them over to Jesus every day at the altar. That has sustained me through all sorts of trials and tribulations. The prayer of the Church also sustains me. As some of you again know, part of the reason why I'm up so late is because I tend to anticipate the day's offices, because as many of you who are in active ministry will know, it's difficult sometimes during a day to find the requisite time to say the hours. So sometimes it's necessary, if I know that I have a particularly full schedule the next day, then I often anticipate the offices. And again, being an insomniac, it helps me to pass the time. But the prayer of the Church too sustains me. One of the key things about the liturgy, to be honest, that sustains me is the knowledge that it has sustained so many Christians and saints throughout centuries. The fact that I am saying the same prayers, that I am praying and reciting the same psalms and hymns that saints, literally, of previous generations have said and prayed, is a great source of comfort and a great source of encouragement, of inspiration, and indeed of motivation. And that sustains me. So the liturgy, I suppose, to sum it all up, the liturgy of the Church, the divine liturgy of the Mass particularly, and the liturgy of the hours, of the prayers of the prayer of the Church, really does sustain me. And we all go through, clergy, go through periods of spiritual dryness, and yet, as I always advise, keep saying your offices, keep saying your prayers, because I know for myself that so many times, even in the driest times, there will be a verse of a psalm, there will be a line, a sentence in a collect that will speak to me and reinvigorate me, as it were. Will suddenly burst forth an oasis from where there was desert. And what I love about, as I say, what I love about the liturgy is the fact that it's the same day in, day out, season in season, and through the year, and despite that, it's never boring. Despite that, it's never boring. There is always something, and you think to yourself, "Gosh, I've must have read that. Well, I know I've read that, umpteen times over however many years, but that's never spoken to me in that way." And I think the key thing, of course, to remember about, for example, the Psalms, is that we understand them, as it were, to be, of course, King David, but inspired, as it were, by the Messiah, by our Saviour. And of course, when Jesus was on the earth, he prayed and read the same Psalms. As a good Jew, he knew the Psalms, and of course, being the Word of God that inspired the Psalms, he knew the Psalms, but he prayed the Psalms, and such that he even quotes from the Psalms in the throes of his passion, in his death upon the cross. That from Psalm 122, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" So the knowledge that Jesus knew and prayed through the Psalms and with the Psalms and in the Psalms is also a great source of sustenance, especially in those occasional dry seasons that we all experience. So the liturgy sustains me. Okay, let's try for another question. So again, just make sure I'm hovering the mouse in the right area. There we go. Okay, and what comes up next? So what do I think is the mission of the Church in the 21st century? Well, of course, the mission in the 21st century of the Church is the same mission that the Church has always had in every century, since the Great Commission, since our Lord's ascension, to proclaim the gospel, and to live the gospel, to proclaim the gospel by living the gospel, because that really is what makes the difference between I think effective evangelism, is that it's not just about the word. It's all about the word, but it's not just about words. It's not just about reading portions of scripture. It's not just about debates and discussions and arguments and interpretations. At the end of the day, fundamentally, the best way of proclaiming the gospel is to live the gospel. To live the gospel. And those of you who are regular viewers of my daily mass will know that my homilies, that's a message that I'm continually banging on about, that the faith is to be lived, and that the more demonstrative we live the faith, the more others will be drawn to the faith. If people can see that the way we live our lives as Christians is different, yet positive, and enables and sustains us, that we're able, because of our faith, to get through and endure and deal with all sorts of trials and tribulations and testings that come our way. If people see that faith for the individual Christian is a positive aspect to their life, then they will be drawn. Then people will be drawn. They will be curious and they will ask about it. As I've said before, not everyone, of course, is as conspicuous as me or other traditionalist clergy or religious who are, obvious straight away what we're about. Although, saying that, I couldn't count on, there aren't enough fingers on my hands, as it were, to uh, uh, give the number of times that I've been mistaken for a rabbi or for an imam. um, even wearing a crucifix. Um, but uh, at the end, at the end of the day, real witness has to be um, proclaiming the gospel by the way of living life. So the church's mission, and what I try my best to facilitate and enable in the 21st century, is to encourage as many Christians as possible to live the Christian life. I mean, I think what's needed, particularly, the great challenge, particularly in the 21st century right now, is there's a great need, I think, for a revival in the church, and a revival particularly of personal holiness. There are, I would say, the vast majority of Christians today, of all stripes, are living lives that are not immediately distinct from those of non-believers, or even from those of adherents to other faiths. In other words, I don't think the majority of Christians are living a fully and obvious, demonstrable Christian life. And part of that is because of, there's been huge sweeping changes in moral mores of our society in recent years, and that has led to a degradation. I don't care what anyone says, but it has led to a degradation of morality in our society, a difference in concepts and principles and appreciations of what is respectful and what is not, of what is acceptable and what is not. On the one hand, there are some positives, of course. I mean, thank God that racism and other forms of discrimination are being addressed in our present time. I'm all for that. I'm an executive committee member of the Racial Harassment Forum here in Brighton and Hove, and a lot of my work in the city is around faith and race hate, tackling and addressing faith and race hate. So there are some contemporary notions of social ideology that are good, that are positive, but there is much, of course, too, that is not, and certainly when it comes to the realm of intimacy. One of the great lies that people like to say against the church is that we're obsessed with sex. That's the last thing we're obsessed with, but certainly the world is. And if you ever stop to really think about it, it's quite shocking the level to which our world and the contemporary zeitgeist is consumed by lust, is consumed by the objectifying of the other for sex, whether real or virtual. But the sexualization of children, the sexualization of sex has always been a selling point in commercials and in marketing and everything, so on and so forth. All of it, of course, mostly is superficial, and that's the problem, is that it's reduced something that should be special, something that should be intimate, something that can be sanctified, and in its sanctification cooperate with God's will in a beautiful way, is now used so awfully. So there's much there, I think, in terms of personal holiness that the church could work on and needs to work on in the 21st century within itself, let alone outside, within the attitudes of Christians themselves, getting back to basics, as it were, to scriptural moral principles, and that that itself could create or make a huge impact on the world around us. If more people were respectful of others, if more people regarded each other first as Christians ought, to regard others as children of God, to see them as children of God first and foremost, and not think with other parts of their body, as it were, that itself, if that caught on, as it were, could make a significant difference in the way that people regard each other, the way that people treat each other, and the way that people think of others. If we could just return to that basic understanding of regarding the other first and foremost as a child of God, that could make a huge difference. Okay, let's take another question. So again, not looking, or did I delete that question? I think I did, yeah. Wrong button. Okay, let's try again. What is your assessment of the state of the church today? Well, I think I've just given it, really. I've just given my, as it were, my answer to that question. As many of you will know from my preaching, my particular assessment and appreciation of the church today is that it is in a pretty poor state. In a pretty poor state. There is so much, aside from what I was talking about just now, but there is so much ignorance within the church. There is so much ignorance of those who call themselves Christians and who either don't understand what Christianity really is, or are ignorant or willfully ignorant of it. It shocks and appalls me sometimes, the attitudes that I hear and see of other Christians about all sorts of things. It appalls me the relativist, modernist, subjectivist way that so many Christians appreciate the scriptures. The progressivism in the church has done so much damage to the church. The statistics don't lie. I mean, I know. I mean, I used to work years ago in the civil service in statistical analysis, so I know about stats. And yes, I know that you can always present them in a certain way, but there is no denying that in the last 60 years, particularly, there has been a significant decline in the number of confessing Christians globally, and that decline has gone hand in hand with progressivist attitudes, modernist attitudes that have watered down the faith, that have watered down the gospel, that have twisted, obscured, obfuscated the clear word of God and the collective wisdom and teaching of the church for 2,000 years. So many are ignorant of. And even people who are ordained, even those who have supposedly studied theology, a lot of the progressive ideas come from academics, these people who are supposed to have studied theology. And that's one of the reasons why I hold fast to tradition, why I strive to ensure that my own preaching and my own teaching is consistent with the tradition of the church, with that single deposit of the faith once delivered to the saints, that apostolic teaching. As I've said before, tradition is vitally important, and the continuance and the preservation of it, and the teaching of it. That's the key thing, and that's part of the problem of the last 50 or 60 years. Again, in Christianity of all stripes and traditions, is that people haven't maintained the tradition. They haven't maintained the faith. And certainly one of the significant ways in which the church has been affected has been in the variation and the forgive the word, but the bastardization of the liturgy. Lex orandi, lex credendi, and the standard of worship by so many Christians today is just appalling. Everything reduced to banal cliches, banal phrases, to emotion and subjective tripe, frankly, that it's no wonder that when things become difficult in people's lives, they fall away. They fall away from the faith because they haven't been fed anything. They're not fed anything to sustain them. They're not given. They're not equipped. They're not given the tools to deal with the challenges of life. And that's the great problem today. So my assessment of the church generally is pretty negative, I'm afraid. Yes, still the church is strong in social activism. So in terms of feeding the poor, clothing the naked, providing shelter, welcoming the stranger, etc. The church is generally still strong in that respect. But sadly, the motivation and the compunction to do it is skewed by a misunderstanding or even ignorance of the summary of the law, the great commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And secondly, love your neighbour. So many Christians today focus on love of neighbour and forget love of God. And that's what we see in the NAF liturgies and worship and teaching that is so prevalent in the church today, because the worship of Almighty God, which is our first duty as Christians, that's how we manifest our love for God, and particularly of course in the Mass, uniting ourselves to the ultimate offering of sacrificial love in adoration and worship of God, which is Christ upon the cross. When you take away that, or if you seriously weaken that aspect, then the result is what's happened in the church today. And so, I squarely lay all this at the foot of the new Mass and of all the experimental crazy liturgies and coffee mornings and all the rest of it that's passed for Sunday worship in so many of our churches today, of all denominations and traditions. It's God is not loved by all Christians sufficiently enough, frankly. That's, I know, quite a hard line, but that is my appreciation, that is my take. Okay, let's go for one more question. Now, I know that we're a little over time. I'm assuming you don't mind. Um, uh, if you're happy to indulge me, I'm happy to indulge you. If you want to let me know, perhaps by using the emoticons. If you're all happy for this to carry on for a little while longer, then just press the heart or the like button. Do a lot so that I can see them. If you just do one, I may not see it. If you do several, then I may see them. Preferably more than just one person doing it as well. Um, um, okay, good. Okay, there's a few more. Excellent. Okay, let's try another question then. There must be something a little more. Ooh. What does being a bishop mean to me? Well, it's what I am. Um, it's what I am. So it's everything. And by which I mean not the big hat and the stick, not the vestments, not the ring, not the bling, not the deference. Um, Being a bishop is what I am. It's not what I asked to be. Contrary to popular belief, but those of you who know me very well and knew me at the time know that I certainly prayed. I had my own Gethsemane moment, as it were, uh, and asked for this cup to pass me by, but it wasn't to be. Um, and of course, obviously, I had to acquiesce. I had to say yes. I wasn't I wasn't forcibly coerced, but it's not something that I took on lightly at all, and certainly was not something that I was seeking. Um, and yet, um, in the end, it came about. So now, it's my life, and irrespective of whether I'd want it to be or not. As I referred to earlier, the burden of responsibility that comes with being a bishop, that is mine now always. Um, there's no such thing as really as retiring. Um, uh, you know, um, I will always be a bishop now, and when I come before God's throne of grace, I will be judged um, as a bishop. So there's nothing I can do about it now except embrace it and accept it as God's will, and apply myself to it as best I can. And that's certainly what I strive to do, and certainly your support and your faithfulness and your friendship, many of you, enables me to do that. But despite for all the highlights, despite for all the occasional benefits, it's not easy always being a bishop. But it's what I am, you know. Initially, it's sometimes, sometimes I think it may hamper or impede some of the work I do in the city, in the wider city, in the community. It's something sometimes I'll admit that I'm not embarrassed by it, but I'm conscious sometimes that how can I put it? I sometimes think that people think sometimes it's a bit much for a bishop to come to a meeting, and yet it's what I am, and there's nothing I can do about that. Now there is nothing I can do about that. It's just something I have to embrace and live with. So yeah. But on the other hand, yes, there are great pros to it as well, because of the opportunities that it has afforded me, because of the experiences that it's afforded me, and because of the opportunities that it's that having, being a bishop does sometimes open doors. Sometimes does sometimes mean that people will listen to what you have to say. I was very privileged a couple of years back to be invited to speak at the House of Lords on the Syrian refugee crisis, and I've likewise attended, been able to speak at other similar meetings and things, and I know that the episcopal character has enabled that to happen. But contrary to popular belief, the fact that my title is in my passport doesn't guarantee me an upgrade to business class or first class. It doesn't mean that people automatically address me as Your Grace, or in any other way defer to me. Those days, as it were, are gone, pretty much, except of course amongst the faithful. But I hope that those for whom I am their bishop, I hope for them that I'm worthy of the deference and the respect that is attributed to the office within the community of the church, and I certainly strive to do my best and to live up to the responsibility in the office as best I can. But for that, it does, I do need the prayers and the support of the faithful and of the clergy for that. Okay, let's try one more question. So again, looking just make sure I did. Yeah. Okay, let's try another one. No, another one. Okay. Well, again, I've already really answered that question. Let me make sure that's taken away, and I answered that one already as well. And I've just answered that one. Okay, there's literally only like a couple of questions left now. So let's try randomly. Oh, I've answered that one. Sorry, I've answered that one. Okay, which of these? Ah. What are my hopes for the future? What are my hopes for the future? My hope for the future is that the church will grow. My hope for the future is that the Christians that I have any kind of connection or influence with will pursue holiness in their lives, and will allow the Holy Spirit and God's grace to change and convert them and their whole life. It's my hope that through our efforts the gospel will be more widely known and will draw others to salvation. and to increase our community. It's my hope for the wider church, for old Romans around the world, too, that all our communities will grow, that all our communities will become, as so many of them already are, schools of saints, sinners who are striving to become holier. It's my hope that that particularly will be true for our clergy. It's certainly something that is a daily prayer of mine for our clergy is that they each day grow more into their vocation, and growing more deeply in their vocation, grow more deeply in love and service of God and of His Word and of His ministry that's been entrusted to them. My hope ultimately, of course, for the future must be the salvation of the world. What else could it be? My hope is that more Christians, in pursuing personal holiness, will become more effective witnesses and disciples of Christ, and will draw and attract and bring more souls to salvation. After all, that is God's will. That is what is God's will. I know you've heard me say it many times, but when Jesus taught us to pray, "Thy will be done," that is God's will. That as many souls as possible should know Him, love Him, serve Him, and be happy with Him in this life and the next. That's that is, and that is genuinely my hope. That's the hope. The hope I have for my life and for my ministry is that I may contribute and effect and be able to enable others to do that with me. And I mean that sincerely and genuinely. I cannot conceive of any reason for my being. This is what my life is about. That's clearly, in my own vocational discernment, has come clearly and strongly, particularly over the last 8 years. That this is my reason for existence. This is God's purpose for my life, to fulfill this office of teaching and enabling of myself and others to be effective disciples of Christ, to be true disciples of Christ, to become saints, and to enable others to become saints, to enable others to know God's love, to enable others to receive their salvation. That's ultimately what it's all about. I think, if it's all right with you, we might leave things there, because we've gone a long way over usual time. I hope, as I always do, I hope that was interesting. Quite a few of you have stayed to watch, so I hope you have found that interesting. I hope that from your perspective, many of you, I hope that agrees. I hope my retrospective agrees with your perspective of the last 8 years of my episcopal ministry. It's an interesting thing. Some people are a bit wary of giving feedback to bishops, and quite frankly, I'd welcome some. It can be lonely here at the top, as they say, certainly I've given my retrospective. I've given, as it were, my perspective and my perception of my ministry as a contemporary apostle. But how effective I've been, or how effective I am, or whatever, I can't be the sole judge of that. So, please do feel free to let me know. because we all of us, are on this pilgrimage of faith through life. We all of us are discerning. We all of us are growing. We all of us are developing in our knowledge and our relationship with God, and through God with each other. Please, if these broadcasts or these hours, you think are a waste of time, please tell me. If they make a difference to you, then please tell me, and please don't shy away from telling me why, because if I can do more of something that's positive and helpful, then I will. Likewise, if there's aspects that are negative and not helpful, let me know as well, because if I can change or adapt, I will, because as Pope St. Gregory the Great once said, that the only title that really matters is, for the bishop, is to be servant of the servants of God. And it may sound a little bit pious, it may sound a little bit coy, a little bit cliche for me to say it, but it's true. Myself and the clergy, and I know very well our clergy, and we all of us wish only to serve the servants of God, and you can help us not just by doing what we suggest, not just by cooperating with us, but also by informing us and letting us know how, if we're being helpful and how we can be more helpful. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for kind of celebrating with me, I suppose, this 8th anniversary of my episcopal consecration. Many of you online have expressed many years and multos annos, and some of you, bless you, have acclaimed Axios, Axios, he is worthy. I pray God that I am. Believe me when I tell you that I strive daily to be worthy of my calling and the office that has been entrusted to me, and of your charity. I beg your prayers, and I'm going to end with a blessing, and then with a little video clip that I think you'll enjoy. Let us pray. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Sit nomen Domini benedictum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saecula, auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini, qui feci caelum et terram. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, descendet super vos et maneat semper. Amen. Be safe, be clean, stay away from each other, observe the lockdown, and God willing, we will come through this together, stronger, hopefully more holy, and more equipped and more prepared, and better able to fulfill God's will for our lives and for the lives of all, to know his salvation. Bless you all.